The return to Ethon Spire was nothing like the departure. When Jinho and Yua had left, they were exiles sent to die on a forgotten battlefield. When they returned, they were heroes, whether the palace wanted them to be or not. Word of the victory at Vareth Minor had spread across the sovereignty faster than any ship could travel. The common Valorians who had lost children and siblings to Rethan's failed campaigns learned that the war had finally turned. They learned that a mixed force of humans and Valorians had fought together and won. And they learned that the Forgotten Princess had led the charge that killed the swarm. Queen crowds gathered at the spaceport when their ship landed. Thousands of crystalline faces looked up at them with something Jinho had never expected to see directed at a human. Gratitude, respect, hope. This is madness, Yua whispered as they walked down the ramp into the sea of cheering citizens. They should not be here. The nobles will be furious. Let them be furious, Jinho replied. You saved their world. They owe you everything. The emperor summoned them to the throne room the next day. The great hall was packed with nobles and officials and military officers all watching as Jinho and Yua approached the crystal throne. The emperor's white fire eyes were unreadable as he studied his youngest daughter and her human husband. You have caused quite a disturbance, the emperor said, and his voice echoed through the silent chamber. The people speak of nothing but the victory at Vareth Minor. They say my daughter is a hero. They say her human consort is a tactical genius. They say many things that were not said before. We served the sovereignty as best we could, Yua replied, and her voice was steady now, without the trembling fear that had always marked her words. We saw an enemy that threatened our people, and we found a way to defeat them. Is that not what loyal subjects should do? The emperor leaned forward on his throne, and for a long moment father and daughter simply looked at each other. Something passed between them that Jinho could not interpret. Ancient history and old wounds, and perhaps a glimmer of something. New Prince Rethan has requested that you be disciplined for insubordination, the emperor said finally. He claims you acted without authorization and endangered royal lives. Rethan lost half the fleet and achieved nothing, Jinho said, stepping forward. You risked her own life and ended the siege in a single day. If that is insubordination, then the sovereignty needs more of it. Gasps rippled through the assembled nobles. No one spoke to the emperor that way. No one defended themselves against royal accusations with such blunt words. But Jinho had faced death too many times to bow and scrape before a man whose son had failed where his wife had succeeded. The emperor studied Jinho with those terrible eyes and then slowly, almost imperceptibly, he smiled. The human has courage, he said. I see now why my armies could not crush your people quickly. You refuse to accept defeat, even when you stand before power that could destroy you with a thought. He turned his gaze back to Yua, my daughter. I gave you to this human as an insult to his kind. I thought you were worthless, and I wanted them to know that their best warrior deserved only our least princess. I see now that I was wrong. Not about the insult, but about your worth. He stood from his throne, and the entire chamber held its breath. Princess Yua Velketh, I name you Royal Advisor to the War Council. Your voice will be heard in all matters of military strategy. Your methods will be studied and implemented across our fleets. This is my decree. The chamber erupted in murmurs of shock and protest, but the emperor silenced them with a wave of his hand. And to Commander Park Jinho, he continued, I grant the rank of strategic liaison between human and Valorian forces. You will help train our soldiers in your ways of fighting. You will have resources and authority to do whatever is necessary. The old ways have failed us. Perhaps it is time to learn from those we once dismissed as inferior. The ceremony ended, and the nobles dispersed with their whispered conversations and their careful calculations about what this new order would mean for their own positions. But Jinho barely noticed them. He was watching Yua, who stood in the center of the great hall with tears of light running down her crystalline cheeks. He saw me, she said when Jinho reached her. For the first time in my life, my father actually saw me. The whole galaxy sees you now, Jinho told her. And this is only the beginning. The months that followed brought changes that would have been unthinkable before the war. Human advisors arrived on Valorian worlds to share their knowledge. Valorian scholars traveled to human colonies to study their chaotic, adaptable culture. The rigid hierarchy of the sovereignty began to crack as younger generations questioned traditions that had stood for millennia. Prince Rethan did not accept his diminished status gracefully. 6 months after their return, he made his move. During a ceremonial procession through the capital, he arranged for an accident. A structural failure that would crush Yua beneath falling crystal and look like nothing more than tragic misfortune. But Jinho had spent 3 years fighting Valorians. He knew how they thought and how they schemed. He saw the trap before it closed and threw himself between Yua and the falling debris. The impact broke his arm and cracked his skull, but he survived. And the assassin that Rithan had positioned to finish the job was captured by guards that Jinho had quietly stationed nearby. The evidence was undeniable. The emperor had no choice but to act. Rethan was stripped of his titles and exiled to a distant outpost where he could scheme and rage in obscurity. The perfect prince had fallen, and the broken princess had risen in his place. On the night after Rethan's exile, Jinho and Yua stood together on the balcony of their quarters. The twin suns had set, and the crystal city glowed with soft light below them. Somewhere in the distance, human and Valorian diplomats were meeting to discuss the future of both their peoples. "Do you regret it?" Yua asked quietly. "The marriage, I mean. You were forced into this against your will. You lost your home and your rank and your freedom. All because my father wanted to humiliate your people." Jinho was quiet for a moment, considering the question. He thought about the life he had left behind. The empty quarters on a military station and the hollow victories of a war he could not win. He thought about the loneliness that had been his constant companion for so many years. "I came here expecting to be a trophy," he said finally. "I expected to spend the rest of my life as a symbol of defeat gathering dust in a forgotten corner of an alien palace. Instead, I found something I never expected." "What did you find?" He turned to look at her. This strange, beautiful princess with her clouded crystal skin and her fierce heart and her refusal to be what everyone expected her to be. "I found a partner," he said. "I found a purpose. I found a future worth fighting for. I found you." Yua's eyes shimmered with inner light as she stepped closer to him. Her hand found his and her crystalline fingers intertwined with his flesh and blood ones. "I spent my whole life believing I was worthless," she said. "My family told me I was broken. My people looked at me with disgust. I accepted that because I did not know anything else. Then you came, and you showed me that worth is not something you are born with. It is something you build with your choices and your actions. You built it yourself," Jinho told her. "I just reminded you that it was possible." "Then let me remind you of something," Yua said, and she smiled that beautiful smile that transformed her face into something radiant. "You are not a trophy anymore. You are not a symbol of defeat or a prisoner of war. You are my husband, my partner, my equal. And together we are going to change everything." Below them the city sparkled, and somewhere in the distance, a human ship passed over the crystal spires on its way to the spaceport. Once such a sight would have meant war. Now it meant hope. Everything had changed. The marriage that was meant to shame them both had become a bridge between peoples. The princess who was meant to be worthless had become one of the most powerful voices in the sovereignty. The soldier who was meant to be a trophy had become a teacher and a leader and something more. Jinho squeezed Yua's hand and felt her squeeze back, and together they watched the first stars appear in the alien sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new enemies and new battles to fight. But tonight they had each other, and that was enough. That was everything. The military transport dropped out of faster-than-light travel above. Vareth Minor and Jinho got his first look at a world under siege. The planet below was burning. Great wounds of fire spread across the continents where swarm landing pods had crashed through the atmosphere. Valorian defense platforms hung broken in orbit and debris fields glittered in the light of the dying sun. "It is worse than the report said," Yua whispered beside him. She had invoked an ancient law that allowed a royal spouse to accompany their partner on official duties. The emperor had been surprised when she made the request, but he had not forbidden it. Perhaps he thought the danger would solve the problem of his embarrassing daughter. Perhaps he simply did not care what happened to either of them. Jinho stood with a squad of 15 human veterans, who had been officially designated as observers. They wore no rank insignia and carried no weapons. They were supposed to watch and report and nothing more. But every soldier on the transport knew that was a lie. They were here to fight. The landing was rough and the shuttle shook as it passed through clouds of ash and smoke. When the doors opened, the air that rushed in was thick with the smell of burning and something else. Something organic and wrong that made Jinho's stomach turn. A Valorian officer was waiting for them on the landing pad. His crystalline armor was cracked and blackened, and his eyes held the hollow look of someone who had seen too much death. "Commander Park," the officer said, and there was no contempt in his voice, only exhaustion. "I am Captain Vorth. Welcome to the end of the world." The situation was even worse than Jinho had feared. The Valorian garrison had been pushed back to a single fortified city. Their defensive lines were crumbling under constant swarm attacks. Reinforcements were weeks away, and casualties mounted every hour. The soldiers were brave, but they were fighting an enemy that refused to follow the rules of war they understood. "The swarm hits us in waves," Voreth explained as he led them through the underground command center. "We form our lines and prepare our defenses, and then they come from directions we did not expect. They learn our patterns faster than we can change them. Then stop using patterns." Jinho said. Voreth stopped walking and turned to face him. For a moment, something like hope flickered in those exhausted eyes. "What do you suggest?" Jinho spent the next hour in the command center with Yua beside him. He studied the tactical displays and the deployment records and the after-action reports from every engagement. The Valorians had superior firepower and better technology, but they were losing because they could not adapt. Their commanders followed doctrine because that was what they had been trained to do. Deviation from established protocols was considered weakness. Your officers need authority to make decisions in the field, Jinho told the gathered commanders. When they see an opportunity, they should take it without waiting for orders from above. The swarm cannot predict what we will do if we do not know ourselves. That is chaos, one of the Valorian generals protested. "Discipline is the foundation of victory. Discipline got half your fleet killed," Jinho replied, and his voice was hard. "The humans lost the war against your people, but we made you bleed for 3 years, because we fought like survivors, not like soldiers following a script. The swarm is not an enemy you can defeat with perfect formations. You need to become unpredictable." The generals argued and protested, but the younger officers listened. Over the following days, Jinho worked with small units, teaching them human tactics. Ambush and feints and sudden retreats that turned into devastating counterattacks. He taught them to think for themselves and to trust their instincts and to embrace the chaos of battle. Instead of fighting against it, Yua proved herself invaluable. She had spent months studying human strategy, and she understood how to translate Jinho's ideas into concepts that Valorians could accept. More importantly, she noticed things that others missed. She spent hours watching recordings of swarm attacks, and she found patterns in there. Communication methods. They coordinate through chemical signals, she told Jinho late one night. Pheromones that tell the swarm where to attack and when to retreat. If we could disrupt those signals, we could confuse them. Can you identify the source? There are larger creatures in the swarm that seem to direct the smaller ones. If we target them first, the rest might fall into disorder. They tested her theory in the next battle. Jinho led a mixed team of humans and Valorians deep into Swarm territory, targeting the coordination nodes that Yua had identified. It was brutal and terrifying, and 3 soldiers died before they destroyed the first node. But when it fell, the swarm around them dissolved into chaos. Creatures that had moved with perfect coordination moments before began attacking, randomly, some even turning on each other. The battle became a rout. Valorian forces pushed forward and reclaimed ground they had lost weeks ago. For the first time since the siege began, there was hope. But the swarm learned from their defeat. The next wave came with the coordination nodes, protected deep within organic fortresses. Jinho realized they would need to strike at the heart of the swarm presence on the planet. The hive ship that had crashed in the northern wasteland. The assault force assembled before dawn. 200 soldiers, human and Valorian, fighting side by side. Jinho stood at the front with his borrowed Valorian rifle and looked at the faces around him. Some were crystal and some were flesh, but all of them shared the same determination. We did not all come back from this, he told them. But if we succeed, the siege ends today. The choice is yours. No one stepped away. The approach to the hive ship was a nightmare of tunnels and organic walls that pulsed with alien life. The swarm threw everything at them, and soldiers fell with every meter of ground gained. Jinho lost track of how many enemies he killed and how many friends he watched die. He just kept moving forward because stopping meant failure. They reached the central chamber, and there she was. The Queen Node, a massive creature at the heart of the hive, connected to everything by tendrils of living tissue. If they destroyed her, the entire swarm network on the planet would collapse. Jinho raised his weapon and charged. The queen was faster. A tendril caught him across the chest and sent him flying into the organic wall. He felt ribs crack and tasted blood in his mouth. His vision blurred and his weapon slipped from numb fingers. He tried to stand, but his body would not obey. Through dimming eyes, he saw the other soldiers fall. The queen was too strong and too fast, and they had come so close only to fail. Then he saw Yua. She had followed them. Of course, she had followed them. She ran past the fallen soldiers with a detonation charge in her hands and her clouded crystalline body glowing with inner light. The queen turned toward her, and Jinho tried to scream a warning, but no sound came out. Yua did not hesitate. She activated the charge and threw herself at the queen's exposed nerve cluster. The explosion tore through the chamber and everything went white. When Jinho woke, he was lying outside the hive ship. Someone was pulling him through the wreckage, and the air was filled with the sounds of victory. The swarm creatures around them were dead or dying, their coordination shattered when the queen fell. Yua, he gasped. Where is Yua? Here, said a weak voice beside him. She was battered and cracked, and her clouded body was shot through with fractures that leaked pale light. But she was alive. Her imperfect crystalline form had proven more resilient than the pure crystal of other Valorians. Where they would have shattered, she had bent and survived. I told you, she whispered as medics rushed toward them. Different is not broken. Different is strong. Jinho laughed even though it hurt, and he reached out to take her hand. Around them, human and Valorian soldiers cheered together, and the burning sky began to clear. They had won. The Forgotten Princess and her human husband had done what the Crown Prince could not. Nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. The months passed like water flowing over stone, slow and steady, and full of small changes that added up to something larger. Jinho and Yua fell into a rhythm of teaching and learning that filled their days with purpose. In the mornings, Yua would explain the intricate web of Valorian politics. She drew diagrams of family trees and alliance networks and showed Jinho where the power really flowed in the palace. It was not always with the emperor. There were factions and rivalries and ancient grudges that shaped every decision. Knowing these things might save his life someday. Prince Rethan controls the military council, she told him one morning. But Princess Velith controls the treasury. They hate each other. My father plays them against each other to keep himself strong. What about you? Jinho asked. Where do you fit in all this? I do not fit anywhere, Yua said, and there was old pain in her voice. That is the point of being the forgotten child. I am not worth fighting over. In the afternoons, it was Jinho's turn to teach. He told her about human history, not the dry facts from data files, but the stories that mattered. He told her about the first humans who left Africa and walked across the world, about the sailors who crossed oceans in wooden ships, about the astronauts who reached for the stars with nothing but courage and dreams. Your people never stop moving, Yua said with wonder in her voice. You are always reaching for something new. We cannot help it, Jinho replied. Standing still feels like dying to us. The Valorians have not changed in 10,000 years, Yua said. Our laws are ancient. Our customs are set in stone. My people believe that perfection means staying the same forever. And you? Jinho asked. What do you believe? She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said something that surprised him. I believe that change might not be so terrible. Not if it means becoming something better. As the weeks turned into months, Jinho began to notice changes in Yua. She stood a little straighter. She spoke a little louder. The fear that had lived in her eyes started to fade, replaced by something that looked like confidence. He was proud of her, though he did not say it aloud. Then the news came from the outer colonies. A species called the Nethrek swarm had emerged from the dark spaces between stars and begun attacking Valorian worlds. They were unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Insectoid creatures that moved in vast clouds and consumed everything in their path. They did not negotiate or retreat or show mercy. They simply devoured and moved on to the next target. The Emperor summoned his war council and prince. Rathan was given command of the response fleet. He left Ethon Spire with 10,000 warships and the confidence of a being who had never known defeat. 3 weeks later, the survivors limped home. Rathan had lost half his fleet in a single battle. His rigid tactics and predictable formations had played directly into the swarm's strengths. They learned his patterns and adapted while he refused to change his approach. Thousands of Valorian soldiers were dead and the swarm was still advancing. The palace erupted in chaos. The Emperor raged at his advisors. Nobles whispered about replacing Rathan with another commander. Fear spread through the crystal halls like poison. For the first time in millennia, the Valorians faced an enemy they did not know how to beat. The swarm learns, Yua told Jinho that night. Every battle teaches them more about how we fight. Rathan keeps using the same strategies, and they keep finding counters. He cannot adapt because adaptation is not in his nature. But it is in mine, Jinho said quietly. Yua looked at him with sudden understanding. You want to help. I was a soldier before I was a trophy, he replied. I spent 3 years fighting your people, and we lost. But we lost slowly. We made you pay for every victory. That is what humans do. We adapt, we evolve. We find new ways to survive. The council would never listen to you, Yua said. You are a human, a prisoner. They would rather lose than take advice from a conquered species. Then they need to hear it from someone they might listen to. He looked at her meaningfully and watched her realize what he was suggesting. Me, she whispered. You want me to speak to the council? You have studied human military history with me for months, Jinho said. You understand our tactics better than any Valorian alive. You could present ideas as your own. They might dismiss them, but they would at least hear them. They would laugh at me, Yua said. An old fear crept back into her voice. I am the broken princess. No one listens to me. Then make them listen, Jinho told her firmly. You are not broken, Yua. You are different. And different is exactly what your people need right now. 2 nights later, there was a family dinner in the imperial halls. All the princes and princesses gather around a table of crystal and light. while servants brought food that Jinho could not eat. He sat beside Yua in silence and watched the royal children argue about the war. Rethan blamed his officers for the defeat. Princess Velith blamed Rethan for poor planning. The emperor listened with cold eyes and said nothing. No one offered solutions because no one had any. Then Yua spoke. "The swarm targets our command ships first," she said, and her voice was soft but steady. "They have learned that our fleets fall apart without central leadership. If we dispersed our command structure and gave individual captains more authority to make decisions, they could not cripple us so easily." The table went silent. Every crystalline face turned toward Yua with expressions ranging from shock to contempt. Rethan's eyes blazed with fury. "The broken one speaks," he sneered. "And what would you know about war, little sister? I know that rigid formations failed at the Battle of Varith Mire." Yua replied, and Jinho could see her hands trembling beneath the table, but her voice did not waver. "I know that the swarm adapts faster than we do because we refuse to change our methods. I know that continuing to fight the same way will result in the same defeats." "She speaks wisdom," said a voice from the far end of the table. Everyone turned to look at Counselor Meath. She was ancient, even by Valorian standards, and her crystalline body was webbed with cracks that glowed with soft light. She had served 5 emperors, and her word carried weight that even Rethan could not dismiss. "The princess offers a perspective we have not considered," Meath continued. "Perhaps we should listen instead of mock." The dinner ended without resolution, but something had changed. Jinho could see it in the way some of the younger nobles looked at Yua as they left, not with contempt, but with curiosity. The forgotten princess had spoken, and the oldest advisor in the palace had defended her. That meant something. Later that night, Meath came to their quarters. She moved slowly, and her ancient body creaked like ice shifting on a frozen lake. But her eyes were sharp, and knowing your wife surprised everyone tonight, she said to Jinho. "But I wonder where she learned such unconventional thinking." "She learned it from books," Jinho replied carefully. "Human books, I assume," Meath said, and there was a hint of amusement in her voice. "The Emperor is considering sending human advisors to the front. Observers, they would be called. I suggested it might be useful to have soldiers who understand a different way of fighting." "And what did the Emperor say?" "He said he would consider it." Meath turned her ancient gaze to Yua. He also noticed that his forgotten daughter showed more strategic insight tonight than his favored son. That is a dangerous position to be in, young princess. Rethan does not forgive those who make him look foolish. After she left, Yua sat down heavily and let out a shaking breath. "What have we started?" she asked as Jinho sat beside her, and for the first time he took her hand in his. Her crystalline fingers were cool and smooth, but they gripped him tightly. "Something important," he said. "Something that cannot be stopped now." He only hoped they would both survive to see where it led. The wedding ceremony was cold and empty of anything that resembled joy. Jinho stood on a platform of black crystal in the heart of the Imperial Temple, while thousands of Valorians watched from tiered balconies above. None of them were there to celebrate. They were there to witness the humiliation of humanity made flesh. Princess Yua walked toward him down an aisle of polished stone, and her steps were small and careful, like she was afraid of falling. Her ceremonial robes were white and silver, and they made her clouded body look even more flawed compared to the perfect crystalline beings around her. She kept her eyes on the ground and did not look at Jinho even once. The Emperor spoke words in the ancient Valorian tongue, and Jinho understood none of them. When prompted, he repeated phrases that meant nothing to him and placed his hand against Yua's palm, which was smooth and cool, like touching glass. There was no kiss because Valorians did not kiss. There was no exchange of rings because such human customs meant nothing here. There was only a binding of names and a transfer of property because that was what Jinho was now property. The ceremony ended, and the guests departed without offering congratulations. Jinho and Yua were led back to the eastern wing of the palace, where they would live together in exile. The servants closed the doors behind them, and suddenly they were alone for the first time as husband and wife. Yua stood near the window with her back to him and said nothing. Jinho sat down on one of the modified human chairs and waited. He was good at waiting. The war had taught him patience. "You do not have to stay in these rooms," Yua finally said without turning around. "There are separate quarters prepared for you in the lower level. We do not need to see each other except for official functions. Is that what you want?" Jinho asked. She turned then, and her dim eyes flickered with something like surprise. "What I want does not matter. It never has." Jinho studied her for a long moment. She was so different from the other Valorians he had seen. They moved with confidence and pride, like they owned the universe and everything in it. Yua moved like she was trying to take up as little space as possible, like she was apologizing for existing. "Why do they treat you this way?" he asked. "I do not understand your question." "Your family. The servants, everyone in this palace looks at you like you are something shameful." "Why?" Yua's hands curled into fists at her sides, and for a moment, Jinho thought she might flee again like she had the night before. But she stayed, and when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I am flawed," she said. "My body did not form correctly when I was born. The cloudiness you see is a defect in my crystalline structure. Among my people, perfection is everything. To be imperfect is to be worthless." Jinho looked at the swirling gray patterns beneath her surface and thought they looked like smoke or storms or something alive and beautiful. But he kept that thought to himself. "So they hide you away," he said. "My father has 6 other daughters," Yua replied. "All of them are perfect. All of them are valuable for alliances and marriages with other noble families. I am the one they give away when they want to insult someone, when they want to show that the match means nothing to them." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You should hate me," she continued. "You were a commander, a warrior, and they matched you with the broken princess to show your people that even your best is only worth our worst." Jinho stood up from his chair and walked toward her. She flinched but did not back away. He stopped a few feet from her and met her eyes directly. "I do not hate you," he said. "You did not start the war. You did not ask to be married to me. We are both prisoners here. Why should we be enemies?" Yua stared at him, and her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. It occurred to Jinho that perhaps no one had ever spoken to her this way before. The weeks that followed were strange and slow. Jinho learned the rhythms of the palace and the rules that governed every moment of life within its walls. He was ignored by most of the royal family, which suited him fine. The few times he encountered other princes and princesses, they looked through him like he was not there. But he noticed that they looked at Yua the same way. She was invisible in her own home, surrounded by family who refused to acknowledge her existence. He began spending more time in their shared quarters, instead of retreating to his separate rooms. At first, Yua seemed confused by his presence, but gradually she relaxed. They would sit in silence for hours, him reading human books from his personal datapad, and her working on something at her desk that she would not show him. It was not friendship exactly, but it was something. A quiet understanding between two people who had been thrown away one evening. Prince Rethan came to visit. He was the eldest son of the emperor, and everything about him screamed perfection. His crystalline body was flawless and clear, like pure water frozen in the shape of a god. His eyes burned with white fire, so bright it was hard to look at him directly. He swept into their quarters without knocking, because he owned this place and everyone in it. "So this is the human," Rethan said, and his voice dripped with contempt. "I wanted to see what all the fuss was about. The great Commander Park who made my father's armies bleed." Jinho stood but did not bow. He knew he should. The rules required it. But something in Rethan's eyes made him refuse. "And you, little sister?" Rethan continued, turning to Yua, who had shrunk back against the wall. Still hiding in the corners, I see. Still hoping no one notices the stain you put on our family's honor. Leave her alone, Jinho said quietly. The room went very still. Rethan turned his blazing gaze back to Jinho, and for a moment pure disbelief showed on his alien face. Then it was replaced by cold fury. Did you just give me an order, human? I asked you to leave her alone, Jinho replied. That is not an order, it is a request. A polite one. Rethan took a step toward him, and Jinho could feel heat radiating from the prince's body, like standing too close to a fire. But he did not step back. He had faced death too many times to be frightened by an angry aristocrat. You are nothing, Rethan hissed. Less than nothing. You exist because my father allows it. Remember that. He turned and swept out of the room, and the temperature dropped back to normal. Jinho let out a breath. He had not realized he was holding. Why did you do that? Yua asked from behind him. Her voice was shaking. Where I come from, we protect those who need protecting, Jinho told her. It is not complicated. That night Yua came to him with a data tablet in her hands. Her eyes were bright with something that might have been hope. I have been studying your people for years, she said. Ever since I learned that I might be married to an alien, I wanted to understand. I have read your histories and your philosophies and your stories. The books can only teach so much. She held out the tablet to him. Will you teach me? She asked. Will you help me understand what it means to be human? Jinho took the tablet and looked at the files she had collected. Thousands of documents about Earth, about human culture, about the wars and the art and the dreams of his species. She had been preparing for this moment for years, and she had done it alone because there was no one else who cared enough to help her. Yes, he said, I will teach you. And in return, you will teach me how to survive in this place. For the first time since he had met her, Yua smiled, and it transformed her face into something beautiful. The clouds beneath her surface seemed to glow with soft light, and her dim eyes sparkled like stars coming out at dusk. We have a deal, she said. Husband. It was the first time she had called him that, and somehow it did not feel like a chain. It felt like a beginning. Commander Park Jinho stood in the center of the arbitration chamber and felt the weight of 1 billion human lives pressing down on his shoulders. The chamber was vast and cold and filled with beings from dozens of species who had come to watch humanity kneel. He kept his back straight and his eyes forward because that was all he had left to give his people. The war had lasted 3 years. 3 years of burning colonies and desperate last stands and ships torn apart in the void between stars. Humanity had fought with everything they had against the Valorian sovereignty, and it had not been enough. The Valorians were too ancient and too powerful and too numerous. Now the survivors had to pay the price. The Valorian emperor sat on a throne of living crystal that pulsed with soft blue light. He was 12 feet tall, and his body was made of something like glass but harder and more beautiful. Light moved inside him like trapped lightning, and his eyes were pools of white fire. He looked at Jinho the way a man might look at an insect that had somehow survived being stepped on. The human delegation accepts the terms of surrender, the emperor said, and his voice rang through the chamber like a struck bell. Territory concessions, fleet limitations, trade restrictions, all of this is agreed. Jinho said nothing because there was nothing to say. His people had lost and losers did not get to argue. But there is one final matter, the emperor continued. A symbolic gesture to cement the new relationship between our peoples. The other species in the chamber leaned forward with interest. The Valorians were known for their cruelty wrapped in ceremony, and everyone wanted to see what humiliation they had planned for the humans. A marriage, the emperor announced. A human of military standing will join our royal family. This will show the galaxy that humanity is now part of the sovereignty. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Jinho felt his stomach turn cold, but he did not let it show on his face. He had expected something like this. The Valorians loved their symbols and their ceremonies, and what better symbol than binding a human soldier to their bloodline like a trophy on a wall? "I volunteer," Jinho said before anyone else could speak. The human ambassador behind him made a small sound of protest, but Jinho ignored her. He had no family left after the war, no wife or children or parents waiting for him back on Earth. He was already empty inside, so what? Did it matter if they filled that emptiness with chains? The Emperor studied him for a long moment, and something like amusement flickered in those white fire eyes. "Commander Park Jinho," the Emperor said. "Decorated veteran of the Battle of New Seoul, survivor of the Siege of Proxima. The humans send their warrior to kneel before us." "How fitting. Who will I marry?" Jinho asked, and his voice was steady, even though his heart was pounding. "My youngest daughter," the Emperor replied. "Princess Yua Velkith, the seventh child of the seventh wife." More murmurs filled the chamber, but these were different. Jinho could hear surprise and something like pity in them. He did not understand why until later the Valorian delegation led him away from the chamber and through endless corridors of crystal and light. They put him on a ship that moved faster than anything humans had ever built, and they told him nothing about what awaited him. He sat in his small cabin and stared at the wall and tried not to think about the life he was leaving behind. The journey to the Valorian throne world took 3 days. When the ship finally emerged from faster-than-light travel, Jinho looked through the viewport and saw Ethon Spire for the first time. The planet was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. The entire surface was covered in crystalline structures that caught the light of the twin suns and scattered it into rainbows. Cities rose like frozen waterfalls, and bridges of glass connected towers that reached into the clouds. Everything was perfect and ordered and ancient beyond human understanding. "We have ruled this world for 12,000 years, one of his Valorian escorts told him. "Your entire species has existed for less time than our current dynasty." Jinho did not respond. He just looked at the alien world that would now be his home and felt very small and very alone. They brought him to the Imperial Palace, which was the largest structure on the planet. It sat at the center of the capital city, like a mountain of frozen light, and its spires reached so high that they vanished into the atmosphere. Inside, the halls were wide enough to fly ships through, and everything was decorated with patterns that seemed to move when Jinho was not looking directly at them. His quarters were in the eastern wing of the palace, far from the center where the important members of the royal family lived. The rooms were large and filled with furniture that had been hastily modified for a human body. It was clear that no one had expected to house a human here, and no one had put much effort into making him comfortable. A servant came to explain the rules. There were many rules, where he could go and where he could not, who he could speak to and who was above his station, how he must bow and when he must kneel. The servant spoke to him like he was a slow child learning basic lessons, and Jinho memorized everything without complaint. On the night before the wedding ceremony, Jinho stood on his balcony and looked out at the alien city. The twin suns had set and the crystal buildings glowed with their own inner light. It was beautiful and terrible, and nothing like the world he had known. He heard movement behind him and turned to see a figure standing in the shadows of his doorway. She was small for a Valorian, barely 7 feet tall, where most of her kind stood between 10 and 12. Her crystalline body was not clear and bright like the others he had seen, but clouded with swirls of gray that moved beneath her surface like trapped smoke. She wore simple robes instead of the elaborate gowns he had seen on other Valorian nobles, and her white fire eyes were dimmer than her father's. "You are the human," she said, and her voice was soft and uncertain. "I am Commander Park Jinho," he replied. "You must be Princess Yua." She flinched when he said her name like she was not used to hearing it spoken aloud. She took a step back toward the door, and he could see her hands trembling slightly at her sides. "I wanted to see you before the ceremony," she said. "I wanted to know what kind of creature my father had given me to." Jinho looked at this princess, who was supposed to be his bride, and he saw something he had not expected. She was not looking at him with contempt or hatred or superiority. She was looking at him with fear. Real fear, like a trapped animal that did not know if the hand reaching toward it would offer food or pain. "I will not hurt you," Jinho said quietly. She stared at him for a long moment, and he could not read her alien face, but something in her posture changed just slightly. "They say humans are monsters," she whispered. "They say you come from a death world, and you kill everything you touch. We are survivors," Jinho told her. "That is not the same thing," she did not reply. She just looked at him with those dim white eyes, and then she turned and fled into the darkness of the palace corridors. Jinho watched her go and felt something stir in his chest that he had not felt in a long time. It was curiosity. Tomorrow he would marry this strange, frightened princess and begin his life as a trophy of war. But tonight he found himself wondering why the daughter of the most powerful being in the galaxy was afraid of everyone, including the conquered human who had been given to her like an unwanted gift. Something was wrong in this perfect Crystal Palace, and Jinho intended to find out what it was.